Welcome to 'Cause We're Nerds, the show that covers trends in comics, movies, video games, board games, and much more. I'm your host Caleb, and I'm here with my guest Chris. This week, we're discussing JRPGs. What makes them a distinct genre? Why are they worth playing? And which ones should you check out? Find out on this week's episode of 'Cause We're Nerds. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. As good as I can be right now.
Good. Yeah. Yeah, it's been a weird couple of weeks, right?
It has been. Is everyone on the CNC Power Hour holding up all right?
Yeah, everyone has sort of sequestered themselves, so we haven't been doing our normal in-person Magic streams, but we're still joking around on Discord and occasionally streaming video games and trying to make the best of it.
That's what I like to hear.
Yeah. So the reason, as everybody knows, we've been sort of sequestering ourselves and staying inside is there's a bit of a pandemic on. I'm not sure if you've been paying attention to any of the news, but there's a lot of nerd stuff related to it. Movie dates are being pushed back, which is almost unheard of, right? Like Mulan got pushed back, and all the summer releases got pushed back.
Tons of movies. There's been at least 5 or 6 like big tentpole films that have been delayed. Some have been rescheduled to next year, wiping that studio slate pretty much clear for the year, which is crazy. And even crazier is the ones that they're actually releasing digitally now. Because I don't see how they're going to make their money back on that, especially ones that are releasing, like Disney ones that are coming to Disney Plus, or most of them are rumored coming to Disney Plus at this point. But if they do that, I mean, they're not charging any extra for that, so I don't really know how they're going to make their money back.
Yeah, I don't know either, and it might just be like a lot of sectors of the economy right now where you just sort of have to take that loss. We'll see. I think we're going to be in a very different spot in a couple of months, but I'm not a qualified economic expert, so I won't say too much.
Well, good news, I am. Dun dun dun.
Perfect. Good. It's good to finally have somebody that knows what they're talking about on the show.
Yes, thank you. So this money thing,
right? You mean it's paper that you trade for goods and services? Really?
I thought we were still using gold.
Right.
Can I get some of that? maybe some GP, maybe some GIL.
some monies.
Right, some monies.
Yeah. Well, yeah. It's a rough time out there for a bunch of businesses, and especially in comics, right? Comic book stores pay for their books in advance to their, like, the only distributor in the country, basically, Diamond Comics, and Diamond is ceasing shipping operations as of March 23rd, which means that all of those stores aren't getting books, and they don't know when they're going to start shipping again.
Yeah, which is crazy.
Yeah, as far as like I can think of, there hasn't been a major interruption in comic book deliveries ever, right? Not nationwide anyway.
I can't think of any.
Yeah. And there was also some interesting news coming from Marvel and DC that you brought up.
Yeah. So kind of along those same lines, neither of them are releasing physical or digital comics right now. Specifically for this week, I know DC, I think, has delayed all of their new releases until the end of the month. And Marvel, I think they're kind of in a holding pattern right now. I'm not sure if they've decided what they're doing.
Right. So you might not be getting to see any of the big comic books. I know that Image is still soliciting some things, but I don't know if that's going to be digital only, or if they're going to try to use a different shipping method. But there's some bright spots in that, a couple of publishers and game companies are coming up with ways to support local stores a lot better. So if you ever get any indie comics from TKO Presents, atlas.com. You can name your local comic book store, and half of the proceeds go there. Atlas Games, which did Gloom, which is one of my favorite narrative card games, is partnering with some stores to do like drop shipping. Basically, you buy it at the store, and the store talks to Atlas, and Atlas is the one that handles the actual shipping and delivery of the product. And Wizards of the Coast, the people that do Magic, which if you've been listening long enough, I have talked about for hours at this point. They're printing and sending certain product to stores through like UPS and FedEx at no cost to the stores. So if you buy um, what's called a mystery booster box, basically the entire proceeds go to support your local comic book store.
Wow.
Yeah. So and I mean like that's just in this little community, right? But there are a bunch of communities that are kind of coming together to support each other because it's a rough time for a lot of people.
Yeah, and I don't want to, dwell on this too much, but I do want to say like I have been, sometimes when you live your life, you're like, I don't know about these people in this world, but I feel like people have really come together globally in a way that I've never seen before, and I think
Yeah.
that that's really cool. And I'm also very curious on more of like the evolution of things, like what we're going to look like coming out of this, because I think there's a lot of infrastructure changes and changes in the way business is being done that I don't think can be ignored once we come out of this. And I'm just curious, like, we talked about movies and digital releases. There's been studies that have said that theater attendance will be down after things are cleared and people can go back. And I mean, personally, I think that that's going to end up going back up. But I'm just curious, everything that's going on, how we're going to look after all this.
I'm right there with you because like with these sort of life changing, you know what? I'm not gonna say life changing. I'm gonna say behavioral changing events that
Hmm.
sticks, right? I think that a lot of the practices that we're putting in place now, not necessarily social distancing, but being respectful of other people's personal space and things like that, staying 6 feet apart and such
Well,
are
I
gonna
mean,
gonna change or aren't going to change. They're going to stick around for a little while.
I would still count social distancing because, I mean, so for me personally, I'm currently working from home and have been. This is my third week
Yeah,
doing so. Previously, that wasn't even allowed at our job. So, I mean, when we come out of this, it can't be like, well, we did it for 3 months. Why can't we, continue doing that? So, like, I think there's actually like things like that are going to change that do play into the social distancing thing as well.
yeah. No, I'm right there with you. There are so many industries, or I guess there are so many positions now that uh, adamantly weren't able to be done remote that we have figured out how to make them remote. Especially the shift of education, which I'm sure that you're seeing firsthand
Yep.
is very interesting. And then there's also a bunch of other like related fallout from that. Like if public schools are requiring internet for a curriculum, internet stops being a luxury and starts becoming a utility. How are the big internet companies going to handle that? Um, like we're going to be in a very different place come November, but that's a lot of politics for a nerd show so far. We might
That
do
is.
a dedicated politics show one day. I think it'd be interesting.
Oh yeah, we could comment on politics, but let's get away from that for a moment. That's a little bit too real. I think maybe it's time to look into a little bit of fantasy.
Yeah. All right. Specifically, some fantasy role playing games. I guess they're not all fantasy, but a lot of them are. So,
A lot of them.
um, RPGs are role playing games. There are two big distinct types, right? When people think of RPGs, you might actually only think of like Skyrim, those style of RPGs where you're put into a character's place in a world and you can just do whatever you want within that world to sort of like craft your own narrative. Um, but there's a whole other side of that where instead you're sort of like you are part of a much larger story that focuses not just on your character but the people around them. And those are typically called JRPGs, as in Japanese RPGs, because that's where a lot of them end up being developed. So, JRPGs are pretty long games. They're very narrative heavy in that you boot them up and they're there to tell you a story that someone or a team of people have spent a long time working on. That doesn't mean that other games don't have stories because that's just, absolutely false. But these are really long, or usually really long, and spread out, and if not necessarily like well thought through, I guess. How should I put it? Well crafted worlds.
Well executed generally.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there are bad ones, but
Sure.
even just like a lot of it is world building and character building, as opposed to a focus on gameplay mechanics and decisions that you as a character can, which is what a
Yeah,
lot
I
of
guess you could. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was going to say is which is what a lot of what are occasionally called Western RPGs are about. Your Mass Effect, your Knight of the Old Republic, anything Bioware's done basically. Um, like those are about the decisions that you would make as opposed to experiencing the decisions that somebody else has already.
Yeah, I kind of equate JRPGs to more of like a movie, or probably more apt would be a TV show, right? Something that's
Mhm.
definitely scripted and it has those moments that are intentionally meant to be really high and really low. That happens continuously throughout the whole game. Whereas your others, like a Skyrim, you can't really put that into the context of a TV show or a movie without having to craft your own story. Yeah, sure, there's the main line story, but that's not, you know, I don't think a lot of people would say that's the main point of Skyrim.
I would argue that it actually isn't. It's like objectively not the main point of Skyrim in that um, Skyrim has so many other avenues for you to craft your own story that the main
Yeah.
story is only there to really like drive you along uh, different paths in the world so that you can see what options are available to you, not it being the reason you're playing the game.
Yep. Totally agree.
And there are a couple of games that do mix these, and they mix them very well. In particular, Mass Effect I mentioned. It does have its own centralized story, but you can make a bunch of decisions that affect the characters around you. But in games like Skyrim, which we'll come back to as like the biggest RPG of the past decade, right? Um, it's I can't think of a secondary character in the game that matters to everybody that plays it.
Yeah, that's true. When you think of Skyrim, it's always the stuff that you did, the experiences you made.
Right, as opposed to the experiences or story that you had, or the moments that, like, the game put with you and, this other character, right? Or how cool this other character is. I can't really like, I honestly probably couldn't name another character that isn't, like, a companion that just sort of follows you around, in Skyrim.
No, I mean you can get like random people, but you have to seek those people out. You know that there it is right there. You have to go do it. It's not something that happens to you automatically.
Right. Yeah, you have to choose to go do it, as opposed to with JRPGs where you're guided along and introduced to these people in a narrative, right? Like a TV show. Um, and also like a TV show throughout the games, there's also a lot of focus on these characters for a specific amount of time or for particular reasons. A lot of time in these games, the main story isn't what's happening to you, it's what's happening to a secondary protagonist, and you have decided to help them, which is very, very unique and something that I find interesting because it opens up the world for so many cool narrative decisions that you wouldn't get if everything was about you, right? You the player jumping in and making all these decisions.
Yeah. So what are like some? I mean, obviously there's differences, but what are some of the big like tentpole features of a JRPG besides that? I mean, like one thing that comes to mind for me is typically you have a party, you have a group of characters that you go with and you fight together. What are some other things like that?
Yeah, so a party is a very good one. There's also like a couple of battle system mechanics that a lot of people associate with JRPGs, in particular the turn-based combat system, where you are part like either your entire party or part of your party takes a turn, and the entire enemy party or part of their party takes a turn, and it goes back and forth. Kind of like it's stylized as like a magical chess match. And that has sort of like changed as Japan has taken influences from a bunch of other Western games, but it's still something that you can find in modern releases and that isn't actually ever like stale because there's so many ways to handle a system like that that whenever a new one does come out, it's very interesting. Um, Another one is sort of like it's kind of silly to attribute to this when you think about it, but a lot of these are like anime style games. The art direction is very reminiscent of anime. Some of the tropes are very reminiscent of anime.
Yeah, let's just call it Japanese entertainment. I mean,
Yeah,
because honestly, that's what it is.
that is very true. Because like anime isn't a cult thing over there; it is a thing. So, um, but yeah, it's a very distinct, usually very distinct art style. Um, and big eyes, flashy fights, lots of villain monologues,
Hmm.
and yeah, I've sort of like hinted at this, and I mentioned it a little bit, but these games are long.
Yes.
I honestly can't think of like one that you could reasonably finish in under 40 hours, right?
Well, and I guess that goes into one other thing is what do you deem as finished? Because most of these games are going to have that main story we talked about, but a lot of them do also have side things. And, you could spend 40 hours going through the main story and be done with it. Or you could spend another 60 hours doing all the extra optional stuff.
Yeah, all the world building, all the character building stuff. That can take forever. All the collectibles, and those are kind of up to discretion. Some games tie them into the ending, right? Like um, whether or not you did certain things throughout the game determines if you got the quote unquote true ending
Right.
for a lot of games, and sometimes those are extremely hard. Sometimes those are baked into the main game, so that you don't have to do all the side stuff. There are a lot of interesting ways that games weave the side stuff into the main game, which I'll talk about one of my favorites soon. But yeah, so these are long, stylish, um, you know, not solo centric games, right? Because they focus on a lot of other people. Is there anything else that you would like add to that sort of, I guess not necessarily criteria, but that sort of those descriptors?
Yeah. So I do want to clarify real quick. You said non-solo. Non-solo from a storytelling standpoint.
Right.
JRPGs are almost always exclusively single-player experiences. So it's not something where, if you love going online and playing with your friends, typically that's not what you're going to get out of a JRPG. There are some that have some of those elements on there, but typically it's like I said, when you sit down and watch a TV show, right? Something that you want to sit down and invest in. But typically in JRPGs, I mean, just like other RPGs, you have a lot of customization elements. I think that a lot of times this comes across in weapons and armor. I don't think that's unique to JRPGs specifically. And some of them don't even have that type of customization. I mean, one really long running series that pretty much everybody's going to be familiar with is Pokemon.
Mhm.
And Pokemon does not have armor and weapons that it changes out, but rather your Pokemon's attacks, its moves, those types of things that
Yeah, which
you're able
Pokemon
to
you
switch out.
chose.
Exactly. So there's always a big customization element. Now, the level that plays into the game changes. You can have some easier quote unquote games where that doesn't play as big into it, and then you have some very in depth ones where if you don't customize your character, you're not getting through it.
Right.
But yeah, I think aside from that, I think we kind of nailed the big ones. One thing I know, and I'm sure that there's bad ones out there, but typically, I feel JRPGs just have some amazing music.
Oh, yeah, for sure. That is definitely something that, they they go kind of all out with because, um, earlier on, when graphics weren't, super great, music was the biggest way to influence mood, and these games took that and keep going. Like a lot of the games are like the game soundtracks are orchestrated. They're big. They do a really good job of like making you feel how the narrative team wanted you to feel in these particular moments. Um, and then there are other ones that are just great to listen to, even without the context of the game.
Oh yes, certainly.
Yeah. I hadn't really, like, thought about that, but now that you mention it, it is easily one of my favorite aspects in a lot of these games.
So I think that kind of wraps up some of those basic gameplay things. So why did you want to talk about this now versus like 3 months down the road?
Right. Well, part of it is, we're all suddenly very stuck inside. Um, Perfect for, playing, a couple hours at a time or for long stretches depending on how your schedule's going. Um But the biggest reason is that we're right in the middle of 2 of the biggest, JRPG releases ever, I wanna say. So, back in 2017, Persona 5, came out and hit the States, and, it was easily one of the biggest, JRPGs, in terms of, like, critical acclaim and sales, in a long, long time and they are re-releasing it. The re-release just came out. It's called Persona 5: The Royal. Extra content, extra characters, like a whole extra like couple of months, new songs for the soundtrack. Which, if you haven't listened to the soundtrack, is like super jazzy, and
Hmm.
really really cool. It's in my CD player in the car. Like it's been in there for months.
Nice.
And the other one is we're about to get the first installment of the Final Fantasy VII remake, which if you're not familiar with Final Fantasy VII, it's a game that came out in the late 90s. It sort of defined the genre for a long time. It was very, very big, very influential because of its use of full motion videos at the time, which were um, at the time, they weren't used to too many great effects, but, Final Fantasy VII did a really good job of turning that around as the first Final Fantasy on the PlayStation 1, and, it was teased in, I wanna say 2005 as a release or at the announcement of the PlayStation 3, the remake was teased as a tech demo, in 2005 when the PS3 ended up coming out in 2006, or maybe it was 2004 and 2005. And then it sort of went dark, and then we got more information on it, and then went dark again. And now the first part of it is finally coming out. I say the first part because the game's world and the game itself is so big and varied that they're splitting it up to sort of like shift the game and narrative systems around based on which part of the game that you're playing. Um, so the first part takes place and very early on in the game, but it introduces you to a bunch of the characters and 90% of the story, or rather, why the story matters.
Yeah,
And
and you said, oh, I'm sorry.
I was just gonna say I'm real excited about it.
Yeah, so this, you kind of mentioned this defined the genre for a while. Not only that, the original Final Fantasy VII defined what JRPGs are in America. It was the first real big breakout JRPG game that came over to America. There were some other Final Fantasy games that came over. They were renamed, and that gets all confusing. But they didn't have the success that Seven did. So it's kind of this big behemoth in the world of JRPGs that everybody loves, and so the fact that it's getting a remake is pretty incredible. I personally have never played Seven. I think that it's a difficult game to go back and play because of the the graphics. I typically don't have issues with graphics, but it seems like it would be a difficult one to try to get back in the world of those PS1 design ideologies. So I'm really looking forward to the remake. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that they actually finish the remake series and bring all of them out, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's a good point because this one was in development for a long time and kept getting delayed and delayed. And even when the release date was actually officially announced, it got delayed again by a little over a month. And uh, it's really interesting because with the remake, there it's not just, a strict graphics upgrade like a lot of remakes or re-releases are. They're changing the battle system. They're shifting the story a little bit. It's a totally new experience for a totally new generation that is, from the looks of it, is also like treating the old material with a nice sense of reverence. And I'm really excited. The demo's out now. It's a lot of fun. Even if you haven't played the original, it's super cool. It's basically the first like hour of the game or so, and it's definitely worth checking out. And Persona 5 The Royal, I don't think it has a demo, but it's also worth checking out. Persona 5 The Royal has, I guess the Persona series in general has one of my favorite uh, narrative gameplay interactions. So the idea is that you're a high school student by day, and in the afternoons and evenings, you sort of um, you're basically fighting monsters that nobody else can see. Is the general plot line for the most recent games. And uh, what you do as a high schooler in this like time management and relationship management simulator makes you more powerful in the actual gameplay parts. Um, and it's a really cool mix of a bunch of decisions that you can make, sort of like a Western style game, but still with a huge overarching story and a focus on the people around you and what you're doing with them or for them. And it's very clever and very it's very well handled. And also, if you haven't seen what Persona 5 looks like, just like find a trailer of it because it is so stylish. It just oozes style. Like I can't find another way to say it. It just like it it figured out like how do I make this pause menu as cool as possible, right? Which is not something that people ask a lot. Usually pause menus are functional, but not in this game. It's definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, it's a game where you can tell the person that was driving it is an artist through and through versus someone who just wants to make a game, which not that isn't to say that they're not artists as well, but you know the difference when you see it.
Oh yeah, for sure. And then the music as well is done by the composer Shoji Meguro, whose music for Persona 3 and 4 as well is awesome. Like Persona 3 had like this weird like hip hop rock infusion thing going on. It was very late 2000s, and um, Persona 4 had this like poppy feel to it, and the soundtracks are just so good on their own. Um, they're like frequently like concert tours of the composer and the artists that they brought on for the soundtracks. Um, going through Japan, even like when games aren't being released, they're just going. It's a very interesting series and one of my favorites.
Yeah, and one thing that's also really awesome about Persona and actually Final Fantasy, and I'm just realizing actually a lot of these long running JRPG series, is that each installment of a lot of these is actually standalone.
Hmm.
So whereas over here in the West, when you have say God of War, right? God of War 1, 2, 3, same character, it's a continuing storyline. A lot of these JRPG series, each entry is a completely new game, sometimes with completely reimagined environments. Sometimes you could even say changing the genre, not the JRPG genre, but the genre of the setting, like fantasy versus steampunk or something like that,
For sure.
where they have recurring motifs. Maybe like there's always a character named Sid, like from Final Fantasy,
Yep.
or you always have the same types of enemies, like you have in Dragon Quest. But other than that, the games are completely separate. And while some people, might have issue with that because they want to continue with the characters they enjoy, I for one really enjoy this because you were able to take a base concept and idea and completely reinvent it time and time again and get something completely new. And so long as it's from some of these series, it's going to be quality, and that it's going to be something new and different that you've never seen before. And to me, that's really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. It took Final Fantasy 10 mainline installments almost, I want to say, a little over 20 years before they did their first direct sequel. Um, and it's it's not necessarily because they didn't want to continue any of these worlds, but a lot of them are as explored as possible within their one game. Like that story is done. Um, those characters are done with, the conflicts that they were facing, and while you could spend more time with them, it's more interesting to meet new people and new worlds written from the ground up. There are some like I want to say Star Ocean, where it just takes place over a larger timeline within the same universe. But that those are also fun because for fans of the series, it leaves room for characters to return. But since they're not central characters, you don't need to know their backstory. You don't need to know what happened before. It's just a nice little bonus.
It's like a well written comic book where a character pops in, says some stuff, and leaves. But if you know who he is, it's even that much cooler.
Right. Exactly. And there are a lot of games like that. But you're right. A lot of them definitely are their own story almost each and every time. Some of them, like on accident, like the Xeno series, which, if you don't know the history of, kind of just like keeps getting shuffled around publishers so they can't use the same property every time. Um, it started with like Xenogears in the 90s, and then Xenosaga. They moved to Konami in the 2000s and did three Xenosaga games, which are among my favorite JRPGs. They're like super dense sci-fi, religious commentary JRPGs. And then it was supposed to be six games, but after the third one, they ended up moving elsewhere and they started doing the Xenoblade series, which at the moment I think they're going to continue. I don't know if they're moving publishers again or not. But sometimes it's by design, sometimes it's not. But either way, a lot of these stories are well crafted and unique, and very very well worth your time. Some of them may be slower or harder to get into at first, but if you can, get past some of the constraints of the genre, like, oh, I have to read a lot, or oh, I have to explore a lot, or oh, there are a non-zero amount of sections where we're just getting exposition and I'm not actually like fighting or anything. If you can get past those, then you're opening yourself up to experiencing some of the most well crafted stories that I've experienced.
Yeah, I will say. So I would say that I am a fairly new fan of JRPGs. I technically have been playing them my entire life because I played Pokemon when I was little. I think that's a very different type of JRPG, though.
For
I
sure.
haven't really gotten into JRPGs until I got my PlayStation 4, which was 3 or 4 years ago at this point.
Hmm.
And since then, my favorite video game experiences ever have been through JRPGs. Hands down. The amount of time that you spend in them, the intensity that you get drawn into the stories, the bonds that you build with the characters, and just the fact that you do that over a long period of time. Whether you're sitting in a room playing it all the way through for 3 days or you split it up across a few different months, you're still spending a lot of time in the game with these characters. And so by the time you finish, it feels epic. It feels like you have really done something amazing. If you've ever finished a long game, you probably know what I'm talking about. It feels like an accomplishment. And so in the same way that the story's over and you've really enjoyed what you've done, there's also that added benefit of, wow, look what I've accomplished. And when you have that feeling, it, at least for me, it kind of sears that into my brain as like a really meaningful memory for me. And because I've had the best gaming experiences of my life in the last 2 or 3 years, and I've been gaming since I was, old enough to buy a Game Boy Color.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, this goes back to early PlayStation 1 days for me. And I love them. I can't get enough of them. There are so many cool ways that the story is portrayed, or that one of my favorite things is when the gameplay and the story both make sense and are intricate enough that you're not bored with just one or the other, and they both work flawlessly together. And you just get to spend so much time in these worlds that are usually extremely fleshed out. Like if you want to know practically anything about it, you can find it out.
And there's a lot of fan bases behind these series too, which is really nice. I know for me, I love it when I have a question about something and I can jump online and find a completely fleshed out wiki about it and learn everything I want to. That's one reason Star Wars is great. And a lot of these series have that.
Yeah, there's a lot of spin-off media related around the bigger releases that helps flesh out the world even more, or retells the story in a way that you may want to experience because yeah, you've already played the game, but you may not want to play the game again, but you still want to spend some time with these characters. So um, there are things like some of these get their own anime adaptations, some of them get their own manga adaptations, some of them get spin-off movies, some of them get spin-off games, some of them get direct sequels, and that's just because that's just like a testament to how rich the world is, and how invested the fans are in a lot of these series.
So, if you just had to ballpark, how many JRPGs do you think you've played? Played and finished?
Oh, played and finished. I want to say like 60 or so. Finished is tough. If it's just played, it's easily in like the mid hundreds, but um,
Yeah.
just like finishing takes a long time. Not every game is
Yep.
going to grab you, um, like a lot of games do, but I've played many.
Yeah, I was trying to think how many I've played. My number for played and finished is probably around 30,
Okay,
with the caveat that a large swath of those are comprised of Pokemon and Kingdom Hearts games.
fair enough.
I've probably played, though, as you said, a lot more. It's very easy to start one and then get too busy and forget about it.
Right, especially the handheld ones. At least for me. Not that the handheld
Yes,
ones are bad.
definitely.
It's just that They I can accidentally put down my my 3DS or whatever and not find it for 8 months. So that happens more often than I would like to admit, and so there are a lot of RPGs or JRPGs on the console or handheld consoles in general that I've started but never finished. That doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means that sometimes you have to prioritize your time, and that's okay.
Yeah, I have the same issue with any type of mobile game. I have a hard time focusing on it and remembering to play it. I have Persona 4 Golden on my Vita that I've had for 2 or 3 years. And you know the last time I played it? Like 2 years ago when I first got it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be fair, the PS Vita is basically a Persona 4 machine for a lot of people. But yeah, I'm right there with you. I also had Persona 4 Golden on the Vita, and it took me until like I buckled down and was like, all right, I'm gonna have this by my bed, and I'm just gonna put in an hour or so before I go to bed. Until
hmm
I like decided to finish it. And now when I play it, I'm playing it on a PS TV.
Yes. I tried to get one of those, but by the time I got around to it, that was not a thing anymore.
Yep. Yeah, so it's not really an option for everybody now, but if you can still find one and you have a couple of Vita games that you want to play, in particular Persona 4 Golden, because it's like a modern masterpiece, basically. You should definitely pick one up.
So we've thrown out a lot of different series. We've talked about them in general. Do we want to quickly go through like a list of some of the long running series and maybe talk about why it stands out against the others and who it might be good for, or maybe just like an overview of the vibe it gives?
Yeah, so we've talked a bit about Final Fantasy, and I'm happy to go through these fairly quickly, and please stop me if you have something to add. But Final Fantasy is a really good one because the way that they shift worlds in between installments means that you can go from a pure fantasy game, knights and wizards, to steampunk, which is what Final Fantasy VII is, or what Final Fantasy X is. And you can just those genres just sort of exist, or even more modern games like Final Fantasy 15. That's more analogous to our world with some fantasy elements, and so that's one of the reasons that you should definitely check that one out. Also, they're kind of everywhere. Final Fantasy 7, Final Fantasy 8, and soon Final Fantasy 9, I think you can sort of get on PC, you can get on your PlayStation, you
hmm
can get it in a bunch of places. Fantasy Star and Star Ocean, I sort of lump together as like sci-fi RPGs, sci-fi JRPGs, and that's because they're both like space age. In the future, we've perfected space travel, and that's when these games sort of take place. So there's some planet hopping, but there's a bunch of cool environments for these games. The Tales of games.
Well, I wanna mention real quick about the Star Ocean series. Um, I have not played a lot of it. I've only played one and I haven't finished it. But I will say, at least for the one I played, which I believe was Till the End of Time on the PS2, one of the big draws for me to that one is that it was not a turn-based battle system. So if that's not your thing, there are some real-time, hack and slash kind of games, and that's one of them. And it's really well done. It's still very RPG esque, but you're able to go around, dodge, attack, and those types of things. But it's still in the JRPG setting. And I found, at least for that one, the game seemed to just move faster. I don't know if that's true of the entire series, but it wasn't as slow as some RPGs can be.
Yeah, I totally understand that. And another one that has that sort of real time action um, fighting system is the Tales of series. Those are especially the 3D installments. Those are kind of like they're really kind of like mini fighting games as the fight or as the combat system.
Hmm.
And but they're as opposed to the sci-fi setting of Star Ocean, they're usually high fantasy. So if that's more your thing, that's you might want to check out the Tales of games. And those stories are all independent of each other. Occasionally, the games have direct sequels like Final Fantasy, but you can check those out on their own. I think a new one just came out this year, or is coming out later this year in America, called Tales of Arise, and they're usually pretty well received. So it's definitely worth checking some of those out. Yeah, and check out the trailers of any of the games that we mentioned to see if it's your cup of tea. Um, one you already mentioned was Kingdom Hearts,
Yes.
which is almost entirely action. I don't. There isn't one that is turn based. I wouldn't count the card one as turn based. So
The is the original card not turn based?
the original card game one is not turn based either.
Okay.
And the original Kingdom Hearts is not turn based. But that's a series that I love dearly for all kind of for all of its flaws. In that it has many of them, but they all uh, I don't know, they don't all make sense in the story of the games, but they still do a good job of working around this complicated story that they've weaved. And uh, I I like them. They introduce a bunch of cool characters. Now, unfortunately, most of those aren't standalone, but thankfully, they're all collected now.
Yes.
Also, we I don't want to spend too much time on it because we have an entire episode on Kingdom Hearts.
Uh huh. If I will say though, Kingdom Hearts is I would call RPG light. It's it's definitely not as in depth gameplay wise as some of the other series. So if that kind of scares you, Kingdom Hearts might be for you. If you're going in though, just go for the ride. Don't think too much about it.
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fair. Now there are game series with extremely intricate combat systems, like Legend of Zelda. A lot of people don't think of Legend of Zelda as a JRPG, but it's a story that's happening to Link, not a story that Link is really influencing. So it is an action RPG for sure, but it is still a JRPG at heart. And Breath of the Wild's combat system is super intricate. I love Breath of the Wild's combat system. There's one thing that keeps me from playing it, which is the weapon durability system. But you can you kind of get used to that. There are ways around it. Um, and Breath of the Wild was the best selling game of 2018. I want to say.
Breath of the Wild, yes. I think it's the best selling game on the Switch. It broke a lot of records. It is very, very, very good. I do not think it's indicative of what JRPGs are. In fact, I think out of the entire series, that one I would almost say isn't a JRPG because it is much more like Skyrim, where you go around and you make your own story, versus a lot of the other games in that series.
Yeah, for sure. It is way more open world than any of the other ones are. Um, but that said, the main story beats and like how the characters are introduced and stuff are still very very JRPG. Um, and then there are others like there are RPGs that came out of Japan that aren't necessarily JRPGs, like the Dark Souls series.
Which I didn't actually realize was Japanese until right before we started recording.
Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
From Software is a Japanese company, and all the games are directed by Hidetaki Miyazaki, I think. And they are very combat focused, and they have a fantastic story if you're willing to like look deep enough and pay enough attention. Um, but like the worlds that they build in those are extremely detailed and fun to explore, but they're very challenging, and it's very much more of a Western RPG than it is a Japanese RPG. Um, and if you sort of like need a bridge, you could probably check one of those out if you're okay with the challenge. And the games aren't cheap, like in the sense that, um, oh, this boss is just difficult to be difficult. The games are challenging. There are ways to do these things without getting hit, basically, in a lot of these games. And I didn't find the appeal of them until recently, actually. But they're definitely a unique experience. But if you sort of want to see the extremely well crafted worlds that we're talking about, um, but you want more action, then those are definitely something that you could check out. And then we have one that people don't like it when I classify it as a JRPG, but it is whether they want it to be or not, and that's Fire Emblem.
Yeah, Fire Emblem's kind of a weird one because it technically is a JRPG because it is an RPG. It has RPG elements and it's from Japan and it's got the world and everything, but the gameplay does not fit a standard JRPG.
Nope, that is exactly correct. It's unique in the sense that it's part of like a subgenre called strategy RPGs. So Disgaea, Final Fantasy Tactics. There are a lot of these strategy games that lend themselves to that use the trappings of Japanese RPGs, and just the only thing that's different is the battle system. Um, that's sort of the main difference from a Fire Emblem and a Final Fantasy game is really the battle system.
Yeah, and I think in general, like how you interact with the world as well.
Yeah, I guess that's fair. Um, Especially I guess in Three Houses it's probably different because I haven't played it yet. Um, but Three Houses was the most recent Fire Emblem game that sold like hotcakes.
Very, very hot cakes on a very, very cold piece of ice.
Indeed. So that's sort of like a lot of the long running series. Now within those, there are some that we've played. There are a lot that we haven't played. But what are your favorites?
Oh man, okay. So hands down, uh, I kind of referenced it earlier. I have two gaming moments in my entire life that stand out for me. The first one is from a series we've talked about. It's from Final Fantasy. It's Final Fantasy 15, which was a bit of a polarizing game for longtime fans, but for new fans, people really seem to enjoy it. That game sucked me in. I spent about 70 hours in it over the course of 2 or 3 months.
Hmm.
And the way that the world is crafted, the that game is interesting because you have your party around you, but the developers spent so much time crafting those people to be like real people and to have very distinct personalities and to interact with the world in more realistic ways than other games that you really feel like a family with them. And between that and the story of the game, and the beautiful world, that really sucked me in. That was the first game I have ever cried in. I don't cry a lot. I don't cry a lot in movies or anything like that. That
Right.
was the first game that ever made me cry during the course of the game. The second favorite I have is actually not part of a series we've talked about. And this one it is definitely a JRPG, but it is different. It's very unique. And it's called Nier Automata. This is technically a sequel to a game called Nier, so it's technically only two in the series.
Hmm.
They don't have much to do with each other, though. You could jump into Nier Automata without knowing anything, just like you could Final Fantasy 15. And I think Final Fantasy 15 is pretty accessible for anyone that wants to come into it. It is very westernized. Nier, on the other hand, is not. I think Nier is
Hmm.
a difficult game for people to get into, and not just to get into, but to actually get to the point where it becomes more than an action game.
Okay.
There's a point in the game where so you actually you play through the game multiple times, and each time you do it, something changes, but you're not just playing through the story multiple times. The character you're playing as will change. You'll uncover new things about the story that you were not privy to the first time. And these aren't like, oh, that's cool kind of thing. These are like big world shifting revelations. And so by the time you've played through it, I want to say like 5 times, and it's not the whole time either. So like your first playthrough might take 20 hours. Your second one might take 8. Your third one is like 3 hours. So they get very much shorter each time you do it, until it gets to a point where you're technically not even playing the game again. You're playing something new. If you can make it through all of that, the story at the end is incredible. This one also made me tear up and cry. And when this one was over, I just sat there, like absorbing it. Like when you see like a really cerebral movie or something, or like a really good movie, and afterward you just kind of want to like sit there and absorb it.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
That was this game. And I know people that have started it and they're like, I mean, it's fine. I beat it once. And it's like, no, 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 no. You haven't beat the game if you've only beaten it once. So it's really good. It is a combination of gameplay types. It's an action game. It becomes side scrolling at occasions. Sometimes it's a mech game where you're firing against other ships, kind of like a Galaga style game. It mixes gameplay types seamlessly as you're playing. So it's very unique. If you play games, that is probably my highest recommendation of any game, not even JRPGs, any game, is to get in that and see it through till the end. Even if you don't think it's for you, just go to the end, and I do not think you'll be disappointed.
That's some pretty high praise.
Yeah, like I said, it's pretty good.
Yeah.
If you want something easy to get into, obviously all the Pokemon games are easy to get into. But they're a different thing. What about you?
Yeah. So there are a couple of classics that I've sort of brushed over a little bit. Final Fantasy X was like one of the defining titles on the PlayStation 2, and I mentioned that it was the first Final Fantasy to get a direct sequel, um, and it's the world and the characters that they craft are very very unique and very touching and very memorable.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there was a remake on the PlayStation 4 a couple of years ago.
Remastered.
Remaster, yes, thank you. Yeah, it was more of a graphical update, but it also included all of the international content, which you couldn't get on the PlayStation 2 release, at least in the states. And so it's the most complete edition of the game, and it's definitely worth checking out. It also comes bundled with its sequel, Final Fantasy X-2, not 11. That would make sense. But that game is is great in a lot of its own ways. It's not as good as Final Fantasy X, but it's worth playing if you liked the world of Final Fantasy X and the main characters of Final Fantasy X. Um, one of the one of the other classics that I want to talk about is Legend of Dragoon. So Legend of Dragoon was a late, I'm sorry, 2001 PlayStation 1 title. It looked almost like a PlayStation 2 title, with a lot of its models, and it's full motion video cutscenes. But the thing that I really liked about it, and that really hooked me, was that the combat system, while it was turn based, every one of your physical attacks was basically a fighting game combo or like a rhythm game combo. So there's like a square in the center of your screen, and there's when you go to attack, there's another square rotating around it, and when they align, if you hit X at the exact right moment, you get an additional attack. and so you can chain these together, and they get more and more difficult with different timings as you get different characters and more powerful skills. And it's a fantastic game. The fan base is extremely dedicated, and they're always doing fan campaigns for a remake or a remaster because this was a cool cult hit in the early 2000s. And if you have a PlayStation 3 or PlayStation 1 or PSP, you can get the digital copies for the PSP and the PS3, or a physical copy for the PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2, because I guess all the PlayStation 2s were backwards compatible.
Hmm.
But it's worth checking out. The magic system is really cool, and the story is well crafted and long. Not necessarily, it's not necessarily longer than any of the other games that we've mentioned, but the range of the story is huge, and uh, it's one of my most memorable gameplay experiences. Was playing that game a lot. And then I mentioned the Xenosaga trilogy, which I really liked, all on PlayStation 2. If you can track them down and you like, Star Trek esque, super futuristic, hard science fiction, it's definitely worth your time to sit down and play through those. And then Persona 5 is so good, guys. I can't stress it enough. It's so good.
Of the like 8 or so hours I've played of it thus far, it is very good.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you've gotten that far into it. You're partway through the tutorial.
Right, exactly.
I joke about it. I got a tutorial prompt on the last. So okay, so the game does a calendar, or has a calendar system. Um, and on the last day of the game, I got a tutorial prompt. They keep expanding the systems that you have access to, and it's a very very cool game. And a lot of like it is the story is like sort of like rebelling against an unfair world, which is relatable to a lot of people. And it's definitely worth checking out. I actually like Persona 3 better, like story and character wise. But Persona 5 is super accessible, and really fun, really cool, and probably one of the most critically acclaimed JRPGs of all time.
Yep. Is that your list?
That's my list. There are a couple of other things that we can go and mention. We didn't talk about Nino Kuni, which was a video game designed in conjunction with Studio Ghibli. Um, so the art style is very distinct, and when it came out in 2010, it was a pretty big freaking deal. Um,
Yeah, I'll say like if you're one of those people that don't like to go back and play old games, but you still want a classic JRPG experience, Nino Kuni and Nino Kuni 2 are that with some extra stuff that's not super traditional, but they do have that traditional element. As well as Octopath Traveler is actually very traditional and looks really nice. It's got a different art style a little bit. It blends new and old styles and stuff and does something new with it. But both of those are like classic style games, but they're new, so they're very easy to get. The control scheme is nice, easy to understand, so good places to start.
yeah, and that's not even we're barely scratching the surface here. There are so many JRPGs that you can try, but these are super accessible and very very well done, and I think well worth your time. And they might just be distracting enough to keep you to sort of like not let the weight of what's happening around you get you down.
Agreed.
Yeah. So I guess that was that, and this is this. Caleb, it's been a while. What you been up to?
Oh. So when we sat down to record, I kind of forgot this was a segment,
Oh no.
so I didn't come prepared. But I can talk about what I've been up to. Interestingly, one of the things I've been up to is starting a new JRPG. I totally did not plan this legitimately. I started Final Fantasy 13.
Mm,
which is a game I've technically started before. I only got about an hour and a half into it. This was before I started playing JRPGs, and I hadn't really played a lot of turn-based games except Pokemon. It is technically not turn-based, but
yeah.
I hadn't played that many games like it. I didn't like it at the time. Gonna be honest, a lot of people actually didn't like it at the time.
Right.
It's growing on me a lot. I'm not that far into it. I think I'm like 5.5 hours in, but it's great. The visuals are incredible. So it was released in 2009 for the 360, and I got to this part and I'm like, I love 15, but this place rivals the environment of any place in 15. It's very early on. So that's a great game. I like it a lot. I would not recommend going into it if you have not played other JRPGs. I think you kind of have to have some of that behind you to appreciate it.
Yeah. 13 just sort of like drops you into the action.
Yeah.
It sort of expects you to be familiar with the systems and the trappings of JRPGs because as you mentioned, it's not quite turn based in the sense that like they take turn based and they add an extra twist to it. But you can't really appreciate that or grok, which isn't a word that I use often, but makes sense here. I guess it's like if you don't know what grokking is, it's like getting an inherent understanding of very quickly. It's really tough to like get that if you're just now trying to figure out the basics of a turn-based combat system.
Yeah, that was actually probably my biggest turnoff originally was I did not understand the combat system. Even though it explains it to you, I did not understand it. I did not understand how I was supposed to interact with it. So that was really hard. I also don't think that the game does a good job introducing itself. You are right; it very much throws you into the action. That's the first hour and a half to 2 hours of the game, and I don't think that section is very good, to be honest.
Mhm.
I think everything immediately following that is much, much, much better. And actually reminds me a lot of Final Fantasy X, which I have also played, which you talked about, which is great. It has a lot of those same motifs and elements and design styles in there. So if you like 10, you might like 13. Let's see. Oh, I also started God of War, the newest one, the reboot, remake, jump off point, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. God of War 4, Dad Simulator.
4. Yeah. God of War 4, The Beard.
Boy yelling adventure.
Yeah. Boy. I can't do it.
That's pretty good.
That's just, yeah, he just calls him boy all the time.
Yeah.
It's pretty great. I was, as I'm playing it, I'm imagining, like, what would I do if I met someone who only refers to their son as boy unless they're, like, about to die or something?
Right.
Like, boy, fetch me my Fritos.
Right.
Anyway, I'm also not very far into that. I'm kind of playing that concurrently with 13, to be honest. I'm probably about the same, actually. Maybe like 4 or 5 hours in. Not that far in. Originally, I wasn't really liking it because it felt like a very incredibly basic action fighting game. But it's opened up a little bit more. I've gotten some more moves I can do.
Mhm.
The enemies have gotten more varied, so it's not just the same repetitive thing. And the story is starting to creep in a little bit more. It was a very critically acclaimed game. In fact, if you play games, you've probably already played it at this point. But I'm just now getting to it. So I'm liking what I'm seeing so far. I was very excited to get into it because I like Norse mythology. I don't know that much about it except for my inherited knowledge from Marvel, which is not traditional Norse mythology.
Right.
So I'm excited to get into it and see its take on that sort of thing. But other than that, I haven't been doing a whole lot. I've watched a lot of TV shows. I watched The Tiger King. I don't know if you've seen that yet.
It's all anybody is talking about, and I don't have Netflix access, so I haven't watched it yet.
It's so weird because I watched it before it blew up. So I was on like the front end of this one, which hasn't ever happened to me before. So that was weird. Uh, but it's really good. It's unbelievable. Like legitimately, if you can find access somehow, like you gotta watch it. It's ridiculous.
Ridiculous is the main word that's being thrown around. Actually, whenever I ask somebody or someone starts talking about it, all they do is like they sort of like pause for a second and they're like, "It's a lot," and I'm just
Yeah,
like, "Yeah, okay, that sounds right." Um,
I I feel like I have to think through whether or not I should recommend it whenever I'm talking to someone because it's one of those shows. Now that it's a big thing, it's easier to do.
mhm.
But like if it hadn't blown up, it's one of those shows where you're like, this is really good, but one, will this person appreciate it? Two, will it offend them? And three, how will I be viewed if they watch it and don't like it?
Right. Yeah, these are all real things you have to consider when you're recommending things to people. But especially something as unique as Tiger King.
But yeah, so what have you been up to?
Well, so I've also been working from home, and things have been a little slow. We actually our entire office, our entire company rather, shifted to working from home. I want to say like the 13th of March, and we've done the shift so well in the middle of tax season. We do stuff related to accountants, and I'm finding myself with a lot more free time like at work. And so what ends up happening is like I have a bunch of anime running in the background, and I have gone through so much stuff, or I guess not so much of a couple of things in the past like 3 weeks. So in particular, I started a series that I'd always like seen around, but I had never actually looked into, called a certain magical index or a certain scientific railgun. Have you heard about either of those shows?
I don't think I have.
Okay. All right. So rundown. A certain magical index aired early 2009, and it has a spin-off, or spin-off is a weird word. It's like a sister show basically called A Certain Scientific Railgun. If you watch any of these, I recommend watching A Certain Scientific Railgun, but first, but basically the both series take place in a subsection of Tokyo called Academy City, where
Mhm.
in the near future people have developed psychic abilities, and Academy City is basically like an educational playing ground for people with those abilities. Um, and it follows a one of the most powerful one of those who's like a middle school girl and her like adventures around town and with like her friends, one of a couple of which are in like a psychic law enforcement thing. Um it's a very like well crafted, intricate world with a bunch of rules that make sense and limitations for the characters, and their powers that are really interesting and make for some
Mm.
really tense situations. And then a certain magical index. The reason I recommend watching Railgun first is Index sort of like throws you into Academy City, and then it adds literal actual magic to the story. So Index, the way it works is the main character has one of these psychic abilities, and he runs into a nun who's hiding out from some magicians, and or I guess sorcerers. Sorcerers is the right word. And it throws a huge wrench into, or I get not a wrench. I guess the best way to put it is that it shows a different side of the coin than Railgun does, because it focuses on magic in the city and how people deal with it.
Okay.
They're both they both have their flaws.
Okay. I mean, the premise of both sounds incredibly anime.
Yes. Oh no, no, no doubt about it. Um, and they're both interesting, not just the worlds, but the characters themselves and a lot of the decisions that they make. They both have really good dubs, so they're easy to watch in the background. But you have to understand that the first season of both of them came out in 2009, where a lot more things were acceptable in anime than they are now.
Oh.
In particular, you have to deal with, if you watch Railgun, the first couple of episodes, there is a teleporting okay, yeah. There's a very perverted teleporting lesbian character that hounds the main character a lot, and you have to deal with her antics, which now are tiring, but 10 years ago probably weren't. But like, if you can get past the first couple that aspect of it in the first couple of episodes, the characters are really cool. The world is really cool. You can watch the first two seasons of Railgun and then watch the first season of Index. The reason I recommend that is because stuff happens in Index that spoils the first two arcs of Railgun.
Mm.
Um, and you sort of like you get to see way more of the world and spend more time with a couple of important characters in Railgun than you do by the time that they show up in Index.
So I was gonna ask if this was like the vibe, like if it was a serious show or fun show. I'm guessing based on what you just said, it's more of a fun kind of show. Probably, I'm guessing targeted towards the same demographic as most anime.
Yeah, it's not Ghost in the Shell or Steins Gate. It's definitely a fun show. The humor lands pretty well, at least with me, and uh, yeah, I think it's fun. It's a fun thing to watch, a fun thing to experience. It's not for everybody. No anime is for everybody, but I think it's worth checking out if the sci-fi aspect of it sounds cool to you. It's a very grounded sci-fi show, and then the magic is also weirdly grounded in historical contexts in our world, basically. As like they use a lot of like religious myth and iconography as reference, similar to like what Supernatural does. And so like they're both good. There's a third
Mm.
one called A Certain Scientific Accelerator that just sort of stands alone, but I haven't watched it yet, so I can't recommend it. But if you're in the mood for a new anime and you didn't want to watch any of the ones that I mentioned in the anime episode, you're more than welcome to check that one out. That's been a lot of my time. It's just watching these shows because I think Railgun's seasons are both 25 episodes, Index is 26. Um, and I think I finished Index, went from the beginning of Railgun to the end of Index season one in like a week and a half. I was just watching a lot of anime.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. I am going through Kingdom Hearts 3 critical mode. I'm
Oh,
halfway done, I want to say.
why?
Because I wanted to play Remind, but critical mode didn't exist when I played it the first time, and I played all the other ones on critical mode. So I wanted to play it on critical mode.
Uh-huh.
I regret that decision. I regretted it
There it is.
almost immediately. It's not
Dang.
that it's hard, and I'm sorry. It's not that it was it's cheap because it's like Dark Souls. It's challenging, but it can be cheap or it can feel cheap. And the
Yes.
combat system is kind of tough to get back into the swing of when you haven't been playing in over a year. Um, and it's fun. I'm on the Pirates world, so
I don't even remember where that falls.
it's the latter half of the game, the beginning of the second half, basically. And
Okay.
I'm excited. I'm really excited to go through and play Remind on critical with like a level 99 character and do all the super secret or all the super cool, super hard boss fights because that was one of the things that I enjoyed about Kingdom Hearts 2, were the data battles and the secret bosses and stuff that I didn't get to play the first time when I played Kingdom Hearts 2 on the PS2. Um, so I'm excited. It's going to take a little while because I'm streaming it, and I'm only doing it a bit at a time, a couple hours at a time. But I'll be done eventually, and then I'll finally get to play Persona 5 the Royal, and then Final Fantasy 7. Um, and that's what my next couple of months look like.
Nice. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what I'm gonna be doing. I think I'm gonna be lucky if I make it through all of 13. So
All three of them.
that's my plan. Actually, I own 13 and 13 too. I do not own Lightning Returns,
Mm-hmm.
so I would have to find it.
Does two have a subtitle?
I don't think so. I think it's just two.
Okay, yeah,
And then
I think
three
you're right.
doesn't have a number; it just has a subtitle.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I do have one more recommendation.
Yeah,
I don't know. Do you have Hulu at all?
I do.
Okay. Do you like reality shows? Not like trashy reality shows, but like reality competitions.
Not particularly, but go on.
Okay. Okay. So there's a show Courtney and I started watching called Lego Masters.
Okay,
It's a Lego building competition show
sick.
hosted by Will Arnett, who voices Lego Batman in
Right.
the movies. It's phenomenal. It's like maybe our favorite show right now that we're watching. We're watching it week to week. It's not over yet. Although by the time this comes out, it'll be close. It'll either have ended or it'll have one episode left in season one.
Hmm.
It's really good. I think the first episode is good, but it definitely gets better as it goes because you can tell that it's a new show. Like the judges at first are very stiff and like they don't seem like they feel comfortable. And you kind of have that vibe around like nobody's quite sure what's going on yet. But a couple episodes in, like all that's gone. It's really good though. It's not that long of a series. I don't think it's probably only going to have maybe 10 episodes,
Okay.
10 or 12 episodes in the first season. So like it'd be pretty easy to watch. They are like 40-minute episodes.
Hmm.
But it's really interesting. So there's teams of two. They come in, they get a prompt, and they have a certain amount of time to build something around that prompt. And it can vary wildly from without like spoiling the prompts because I think that's half the fun. Like one week they had to build something that would be, and they have to build a story into it that it would be awesome when it's destroyed.
Okay.
Another week they had to build something that involved like monsters, like a
Okay.
monster movie. So like it's really varied. The people they have on there are pretty funny. Some of them are a little kooky. A couple of them aren't that great, but they're the first ones to leave. So it's really good though. If you get a chance, I would at least try the first episode.
I'm very intrigued. I mean, I like Will Arnett, and I like the idea of a Lego building reality show. I think that's pretty cool. Um.
Yeah, it would be like a good thing to put in the background while you're working.
Oh, perfect. That's all that I want right now.
Yeah.
You have no idea. Cool. I think I've talked enough about stuff that I recommend. But now's a good time to be jumping into a lot of long form media for sure.
Oh, yes. Yes, it is. And it will save your life.
Yeah.
That might have been a poor choice of words.
It'll I don't know. It'll lift your spirits, I think. I mean,
There you go.
if you watch the wrong show that's like, mad depressing or something, it might, crush you, but
I have one more recommendation. I'm
okay.
sorry. I
Please.
completely forgot about this. So Courtney and I watched Your Name a while back. It was phenomenal. Go check it out. But we were trying to find movies like Your Name, and we found one called A Silent Voice
Yes, good.
that we
Okay,
watched.
good.
Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it yet. I need to.
It's good.
I'm
It's
glad
really,
that
it's not as good as Your Name, but it is very good. So highly recommend it. It's an anime movie. Check it out.
did you watch the dub? This is a weird question because like I know you don't care whether you watch one or the other, but I want to know if you watched the dub, and I'll tell you why.
I did watch the dub. Yeah.
Okay, all right. So they hired like a deaf actress for the dub.
Did they?
Yeah.
Okay. I gotta be honest. you can't tell.
Yeah.
Um, I legitimately just thought it was a regular person. But that's cool that they did that.
Yeah, it's one of those like representation things that not a lot of people pay attention to, but it matters to the people that it really matters to.
Right.
And I think that it was a really cool move. And I wish that it had like a wide enough theatrical release that I could have supported that. But I didn't find out about it till after it was out of theaters.
Well, I own it as a physical copy. So whenever I can actually come in 6 feet of you,
Yes,
I'll let you borrow it if you haven't seen it by then.
fair enough. I appreciate that. Um, I was going to mention another dub, but I can't. I suddenly can't think of it. That you guys might want to check out. Uh, but yeah, no, that's great. I'm glad that you saw it. I'm glad that you liked it because it's sort of like it got released at the same time as Your Name and sort of got overshadowed. Um, from my understanding, that they're both very good anime films.
Yes, but both of which are movies that you should watch even if you are not into anime.
You know who else is a great anime film that you should watch even if you don't like anime?
Who's that, Chris?
Taylor Poole. Taylor Poole did
Yes.
did our theme music. You can check him out over at taylorpoolemusic.com. That's TAYLORPOOLE music.com. You can actually find me over at twitch.tv/CNC Power Hour, where at the moment it's just me and occasionally Clay streaming from their house. But we stream Magic the Gathering and video games throughout the week. And then you should also check out the Cuz We're Nerds website, cuzwerenerds.com, CUZWERENERDS.com for past episodes like the Kingdom Hearts episode that we mentioned and the anime episode that I mentioned, which was that officially our first copyright stricken video?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, I did a good job with that.
Thanks for listening to 'Cause We're Nerds, this particular episode. Stay up to date with all the nerdy news and podcast drops by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. You can also leave us comments and feedback at cuzwerenerds@gmail.com. That's CUZWERENERDS@gmail.com. And, as always, if you enjoy this podcast, we would love it if you could leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or whatever else you're listening to this on. And, as always, stay nerdy.
It's been a while since we've done that one, huh?
Nailed it.
Got it.